God has a big butt, doesn't he? Of course, I'm talking about the part of speech, not the part of the body. Just like the story Dr. Carson was relating there, so often things look one way to us, but God sees something totally different. But God can do something to bring about a totally different outcome. There is no situation in life that should make us forget that God has a big butt and he's not afraid to use it. You may have noticed that in our first reading for today. God has a big butt, and he's not the only one who has a big butt, is he? As Nehemiah was recounting the history of the Israelite nation, there sure seemed to be a lot of butts flying around in that passage. You told them to go in and take possession of the land you had sworn with uplifted hand to give them. But they, our ancestors, became arrogant and stiff-necked, and they did not obey your commands. They became stiff-necked, and in their rebellion appointed a leader in order to return to their slavery. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Therefore you did not desert them. You warned them in order to turn them back to your law, but they became arrogant and disobeyed your commands. By your Spirit you warned them through your prophets, yet they paid no attention, so you gave them into the hands of the neighboring peoples. But in your great mercy, you did not put an end to them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and merciful God. That is a whole lot of buts. And whenever that word pops up, it's a game changer, isn't it? Each time, it takes the narrative and flips it on its head, whether for better or worse. God was faithful and trustworthy in all his dealings with the Israelites, but they didn't want to have anything to do with him. The Israelites were stubborn in their rebellion, but God treated them with mercy and grace. This happens all throughout Scripture. A flood was sent to wipe away evil from the earth, but God preserved Noah and his family in the ark. Abraham and Sarah were unable to have children, but God blessed them with a son. The Israelites were trapped at the Red Sea by Pharaoh and his army, but God parted the waters. Jesus died on the cross at Calvary, but God resurrected him 3 days later. This must be extremely frustrating to Satan. For no matter where we find him sowing seeds of evil and darkness, God is there with his big butt to work something good out of it anyway. Even when we think we're getting the upper hand with our own butt, God is still there and working. God gave Joseph dreams of being top dog in his family, but his brothers sold him as a slave and got rid of him. But God made Joseph top dog in all of Egypt, which enabled him to save the lives of those brothers. You see, it didn't matter that his brothers had done the wrong thing. God worked through their own evil deed to bring good to them. As Joseph told them later, you intended to do me harm, but God intended it for good. We're not so different from Joseph's brothers or the Israelites of old. It's thousands of years later, but we're still veering off course today. Sometimes we veer off course on purpose. Sometimes it's completely unintended. Either way, God always has another butt up his sleeve. There's a sentence you won't hear very often. When we've thrown our own butt like a wrench into the middle of a situation and messed it all up, God comes right back to us with his own game changer. We expect punishment, but God practices forgiveness. We expect to be given up on, but God is faithful until the very end. He doesn't let our butt determine the final outcome. If we veer off course, he's there to meet us with a new revelation of grace. but is definitely one of the biggest words in God's vocabulary. And I bet you can think of plenty of situations in your own life where that has been the case. We need to remember those times a lot more often than we do. We need to think back and recall all the ways that God has intervened in our lives and turned what had been meant for evil into something good. We need to remember all the times in our lives that would have worked out so differently if we weren't able to say, but God. I think that's the message contained in our second reading from Nehemiah 4, which recounted the awful time God's people had rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Some people just didn't want that mission accomplished. When Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. Talk about having enemies. First, this group of people tried to intimidate the Israelites with insults and threats. And when that didn't stop the work, they plotted to attack the ones who were rebuilding the wall. And of course, that made the people very nervous. They posted a guard at the wall day and night to respond to any threats that came up. Later, Nehemiah stationed some of the people with swords and spears and bows at the weakest points along the wall. Tensions were high. Many people were afraid. Nehemiah realized that he needed to do something, and that's when he stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, "Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes." Notice the two things that are linked in that verse. First, don't be afraid. And second, remember the Lord. I think the reason those two things are linked is because they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. If you are afraid, it's because you've forgotten the Lord, who is great and awesome. And if you remember the Lord, there's truly no place for fear. If you remember the Lord, the first thing you recall is that he has a big butt, but he's not afraid to use it. I don't think it's too simplistic to say that fear and God cannot coexist in the same space, because God dissolves fear. Seriously. Let's take a moment to think about that. I don't know what you all are going through in your lives right now, but no matter what situation you may be facing, is it possible for fear, worry, and anxiety to grip your heart when you truly remember the Lord and who he is? God is the one who created the heavens and the earth. We wouldn't have to stop and think very long to recall the dizzying, mind-boggling realities of the universe, at least the ones we know about, and how God not only created them, but is sustaining them every moment. He's the one who has complete control over nature. He's the one who has performed every possible miracle, healing diseases, calming storms, multiplying food, even resurrecting people from the grave. He does all these things whenever he wants to. Nothing is too hard for him. Nothing is impossible with him. Whatever your situation entails, whatever it is that needs to happen, God can do it. 100%, without question. If it really needs to be done, if it is the very best thing, he can do it and he will do it. I remember when my father was first diagnosed with his ALS and I prayed for healing. I knew God could heal him if he wanted to, but let's face it, I didn't figure God was going to want to. Because statistically, that doesn't happen a lot. And the thought of that was making me desperate. And I've probably told you before how God interrupted my prayer for healing one day and said, "Okay, Kelley, let's say I heal him. Then what?" "What do you mean, then what?" "It'll be great." "What do you mean, then what?" "When will it be okay for you to say this temporary goodbye? When he's 75? 80? 95? 105? When will his death be okay with you?" And I realized it was never going to be okay with me. And realizing that is what helped me to put it in God's hands then and trust that if it was okay with him at that time, then I could be at peace with it. And subsequently, it occurred to me that it really didn't matter if my father died from ALS because God didn't heal him. Would that be the end for God? No! God is perfectly capable of busting open my father's resting place at Memorial Park Cemetery if he wants to. He is able to bring my dad healthy and whole right through those back doors right now, if that was necessary. And that would be really awesome, I just have to say. I would love that. So we need to remember a lot more than we do, that whatever our situation entails, whatever it is that needs to happen, God can absolutely do it, without a doubt. Nothing is too hard for him. Nothing is impossible for him. And if we really believed that about God, if we really believed that we had this kind of almighty power on our side, and if we really believe that there are no limits on what he can do when it is the best and right thing to do, would we be afraid? How could we be afraid? As Paul said in Romans 8, if God is for us, who can be against us? No one can oppose you. No one can snatch you out of his hand. And any hard thing that comes to you in life is not a surprise to him. He has seen it coming, and if he allows it to unfold in your life, he must know that for whatever reason, it can be turned for the good. It can be turned to your or somebody else's advantage, because he is working all things together for good. So the next time you're afraid, take Nehemiah's advice. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. He has a big butt up his sleeve for every problem, and he's not afraid to use it. He is bigger than anyone and anything we will ever encounter in this life. Nothing can stop him from carrying out the plans he has for you.